Hi, everybody. We're live. Welcome to the October session of our movie mass. I am your host, Jason Almy. Appreciate you tuning in to this fine live stream, or maybe watching it later on my Patreon, uncovered. I welcome you guys all to this evening's screening of a legendary horror film. Of course, this is October. It is the spooky season, and we would be remiss to watch any other genre but a horror classic in the month of October for our movie mass. So we do have to pay homage to a classic of horror. I'm very thrilled to be presenting tonight the 1979 version, Werner Herzog version of Nosferatu. We will be joined shortly by a very special guest this evening as well, Mr. Werner Herzog himself. I'm thrilled. I'm beyond thrilled and excited. I was trying to keep a lid on that, but beyond excited to welcome acclaimed filmmaker of tonight's special feature. But a brief preamble before we get started, give people a chance to stumble into this stream. First of all, happy Halloween, maybe a couple days in advance, but even still, we are right upon the day itself. It is only right, I think, that we spend a little time thinking about what makes a really good horror movie. I think this time of year and in selecting tonight's movie, especially, I really had to consider like what is like a horror film to me? What does it mean to me? I think that there are certain parameters, of course, that a film has to meet in order to be considered a horror film. Notwithstanding certain genre mashups, like recently, "What We Do in the Shadows," that mockumentary film mashed up comedic genres with the horror elements of werewolves and vampires and such, but I really think that more falls into kind of a mockumentary comedy sort of genre, and just in terms of the feel of the film and the film language. It's not a horror movie, even if it deals with vampires and werewolves and the accoutrements of the horror genre. I think when we talk about a true horror film, there are certain genre tropes, and there is a certain set of film language that can be used to discuss horror, and certainly things that add horror to a film and make a film a horror film. I think maybe there's a few different elements that I have singled out. There's things like the jump scare, which happen in quite a variety of horror films, and for my money, I mean, those are typically effective, especially the first time around. If you truly don't see it coming, the jump scare can be a very effective way to get audiences to like, "Oh shit," that sort of very visceral immediate reaction. But when you think about it, that the reaction to a jump scare is not horror or fear or dread, it's really shock. I mean, jump scares happen in films that aren't horrors, typically like thrillers, sometimes like dramatic like action films. You'll get kind of that jump that something kind of pops out of nowhere, like Independence Day. I think of Independence Day in that case. It's not really a horror film. It does have aliens, but it's more of like a kind of an epic shoot 'em up sci-fi thing. But there is that moment where the alien kind of bangs the scientist guy up against the glass, kind of out of the fog, and it just happens so fast. The whole theater's like, and so the jump scare is it's not something that I would say is limited strictly to horror, although I think it gets used there more often than in other types of films. But I would also say that the immediate emotion that a jump scare evokes within the audience is shock. It startles us, right? We're not expecting it. It's like boo, it's not truly scary. It's just somebody grabbing your shoulder out of nowhere when you weren't expecting them. You kind of shit your pants a little bit, but just because you shit your pants doesn't mean it's horrific. You shit your pants out of shock. You can also shit your pants because you're really, really super scared. So that really, pairing out the jump scare as an effective and acceptable in the right quantity when done right. I do accept jump scares in horror films. I don't think you can lean on them too hard. Have one or two, have them effectively done at the proper moment to evoke that oh shit kind of element. And I do think that they can punctuate a horror film quite effectively. I think that maybe what's more effective in my mind for horror, it really truly causes like feelings of dread, horror, being unsettled, are the very type of really kind of semiotic and semantic film language that we're going to see in tonight's version of Nosferatu. And it's the reason that I selected this film. This film is a quintessential horror film for me, not because it has any jump scares. It really doesn't. There might be one or two moments that are a little bit startling or surprising, but not moments that just kind of bang against the screen real quick, where the music and the immediate flash of imagery sort of manipulates you a little bit. I think those are, it's like a dick and fart joke. Like comedy films have dick and fart jokes, kind of low hanging fruit. It's easy to bust out for a laugh. You can do it, but don't lean on it too hard. The same thing goes with jump scares in a horror film. Obviously, it's kind of low hanging fruit. And sure, you can startle me to get a reaction out of me the first time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the film is going to sit with me and that I'm going to continue to contemplate the film going into the future, or that I will revisit the film with a particular interest in picking up more of the nuance. This film, on the other hand, is chock full to the brim with the kind of nuance and the kind of style, I think, and music and just the interplay of imagery and music that are really really very effective in my mind, in my opinion, for a horror film. So I hope that over the course of this commentary, I'll be able to convince you of that, and that eventually you will agree with me that this is a classic horror film. Um, Really, in my opinion, it's a seminal horror film, but one that is oftentimes overlooked, I think. I think there are folks who will cite the original Nosferatu by Murnau, the 1922 version, as being particularly important because of when it was released, being that it was a very early entry into the horror genre and very formative as such. This, because it came out in 1979, I mean, this is living memory. The director's still here with us tonight in the studio. I mean, he's calling in. He's calling into the studio. He's not sitting next to me. Otherwise, I'm sure his face would be right here by now. But what I'm saying is the director is still with us. It's a relatively recent film. And so, as such, it probably has not had. I mean, I think the people who have seen this film love this film and understand that this is a classic. But I think there's a lot of people who haven't seen this film, and films that came out during the same era. This came out, I believe, the same time, the same year as the first Halloween, right? First Halloween was 79. I should double check that before I say. I'm saying that very confidently, but this is also a live stream, so I can't fucking double check it right now. Otherwise, you guys would be looking at the top of my head while I read Google, and that's not very entertaining. So I'm gonna say I think the first Halloween was 79. If I'm off, I'm really probably only off by a year. It was 78, maybe. Okay, so this is the same era as the very original Halloween film. Films that followed this very closely are the first Friday the 13th film came out in 80, so this came out the year after Halloween, or excuse me, after Nosferatu. So, I mean, this is a film that, while people will certainly talk about the first Halloween, I mean, you talk about horror films, that is a film that's going to get brought up in every single one of those conversations. I think the first Friday the 13th and some of those sequels will get brought up too as we transition into horror films of the 80s. But it's really remarkable how this film came out right at the same time, and yet it is not discussed in the same way. Of course, Halloween is probably a more commercial project, as was Friday the 13th. These were films that were created specifically to make money. Where I mean, Werner Herzog, I mean, I'm sure he likes making money, keeping a roof over his head. I'll ask him in a minute, but the idea is that he's also producing something with artistic merit that really, he's putting something out there as film art too. So I think we have to appreciate that, and hopefully everybody who watches this commentary with me, hopefully, what we can do is together develop a deeper appreciation for Nosferatu, for Herzog's Nosferatu, because I think it is a superior horror film, and I will talk about all of the reasons why I think that as we go. Before I introduce Mr. Herzog himself, let me just make one final point. This film, as you probably know, was filmed twice. It was filmed originally in German, but then it was also filmed at the same time in English. So it's unique in that regard because it was being produced and largely funded by 20th Century Fox, an American company, for release domestically here in the United States. So, in addition to shooting in his original German, he shot in English, and most of the English lines are delivered by the actors themselves. So I mention that because to me it's not just a piece of trivia. It's kind of cool because a lot of times when a foreign film gets brought over to the English market, it's a film that was made for Japan or China or Korea, and it gets brought over, and sometimes they'll dub it. But what they're really doing is they're paying a whole different set of actors money to go in and overdub the original Korean language dialogue. Here, what they're doing is quite interesting and very much more rarely seen, which is the filmmaker himself, Werner Herzog, is producing this film in both languages simultaneously. So they shoot the scene in German. Go back, take your starting places, everybody. They shoot the scene in English. Now, that's cool because it means that this English version is director approved, stamp of approval. I happen to know because I have heard Werner Herzog mention it in the past that he does prefer the original German. It's his first language after all. However, I am disregarding his preference for tonight and playing the English version for us. A, because subtitles are going to be hard to read on the live stream where I'm using YouTube and having to cover up the image of the film. It's going to make subtitles really hard to read. Although it's mostly going to be just me yapping the whole time anyway. We're not really going to listen to a whole lot of this film. But I will also say that I prefer to watch the English language version of Nosferatu. And the reason being is that I find it more otherworldly and unsettling. I think my one of my theses that I'm going to discuss tonight is that this film has a surreal and dreamlike um, tone and mood. The imagery and music over the course of the film become even more dreamlike from start to finish, and it evokes that feeling in us of we're witnessing almost a fever dream. We're seeing something otherworldly unfold. It's not the world that we're used to. Certainly not in 2023. We're looking at a 19th century German town for most of the film. Some of the film we're looking at 19th century um, Carpathian ruins, but either way, there's the temporal detachment that we see because we're watching a movie that's set 200 years earlier than like right now. That's a little weird, right? Because it doesn't look modern. It has this kind of otherworldly feel temporally, but then also hearing the strange accents and the watching this thing in English with the delivery being just a little bit different. I mean, it's not native English speakers that are performing this in English. So to me, that enhances the director's approach and the the mood and the feel of this film is enhanced by watching the English version. So that is the last of the caveats or things that I wanted to mention before going into the film. I will introduce my co-host for the evening. It's the first time I've co-hosted a live commentary, and I don't know what kind of challenges that will entail. But let me just I'll let the man introduce himself here. Here is my co-host for the evening.
Yes, hello. This is renowned, legendary German filmmaker Werner Herzog,
Hey,
and
Warner.
I want to say that I am honored and
Thank you.
beyond
Yeah,
pleased to join you on this movie mass
of course, of
because
course.
the reverence for film that you show
Mm.
is incredible
Oh,
and honorable, and I truly appreciate a man such as yourself who
wow.
can
Jeez,
devote
thank you.
himself to film in the way that a true legend filmmaker like myself has. And it is a beautiful thing to be joining you. I also want to say, I want to apologize to everyone because I am just getting over a cold. I have a bit of a
Oh,
cold recently, and
it's okay.
um,
I
it
can't even
strikes me
tell.
as a great irony that God would see fit to mock a legend such as myself with something as as dull and mundane as a cold. It seems like a great profanity against a legendary filmmaker and artist and a visual artist and a poet such as myself to be struck down and to be lowered to the common man, that I have to endure such a mundane reality as a cold. I should be above such things, clearly, but God sees fit to mock me, even though I do not believe in him.
Wow. Well, there was a lot. Thank you, Warner, and welcome to the show, Mr. Herzog. I'm also beyond thrilled to have you here. It's really remarkable for such a small, tiny YouTube channel such as myself to welcome an esteemed, world-renowned director like you to the show.
It is true that not many YouTube channels offer up the kind of wisdom
Mm,
and depth
mm,
of content that yours does. It
thank
is
you.
a mockery of film analysis that occurs on even the best days on YouTube, because
Mm,
most people will put up a video of 10 minutes or 12 minutes, and they will make some grand proclamation in the title of the video saying that they will do a deep dive analysis into some film like Grandma's Boy or Waiting, the first Waiting, some silly trivial film that they will claim that they are doing a deep analysis on. And uh, despite their claims of deep analytical insight, all they offer are mere scraps, because they spend the entire duration of the 12 minutes of the YouTube video only describing the narrative elements that anyone who has seen the film would be familiar with. They are not doing a
mm,
deep dive. All they are telling me is what happened in the movie, which I have already seen 18 times. Why would you need to relate to me the events of a film that I have already watched more than once? I do not need to be reminded what happened in the 40-Year-Old Virgin. I already know what happens in the 40-Year-Old Virgin. I watched that movie every weekend for a year in 2008. I know what happens at the end of 40-Year-Old Virgin. You do
every
not need to
weekend?
tell me what happens during the course of that film, because I've seen it. But your YouTube, Jason, is very different, because you do offer a depth of analysis. You do talk about the inner meaning of a film. And while I think such a attempt is in vain, is futile in the face of the oppression that we must feel in the face of grand art, such as my own films, even still you try. You throw all of your effort in, and you do try to deconstruct the film. I do not
Hmm.
believe in
Hmm.
any deep meaning of a film such as what you are claiming. I think you are full of shit, and yet I appreciate your vain attempts as a small man, flailing about in his own little corner of YouTube that no one will ever see. I appreciate you and I applaud you for your efforts.
Wow. Okay. Well, that also was a lot. I don't know that I could have said it any better myself. A lot of YouTube channels do claim to offer deep analyses of films when in reality they spend 80% of the time recapping the narrative events of the film. They just give you a synopsis and then they beg you to check out their Patreon. By the way, patreon.com/team Almy. Check us out for the uncovered video, right? I got to cover this video up because of YouTube, but if you go to patreon.com/team Almy, you can join. I post this replay there and you can see this shit uncovered. That said, let's go ahead and bring the film in. Let's go ahead and start us off, and maybe Werner, you could introduce us to Nosferatu a bit. What do you say?
Yes, and so today we will be watching my one of my finest films, among, of course, others like Guire and Fitzcarraldo and The Enigma of Caspar Hauser and Grizzly Man. Of course, I've made such a number of legendary films, but this is definitely one of the great films that I've made, and it is Nosferatu, Der Phantome Der Nacht, and it is a great honor to be watching it with you today, Jason.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. That was a great intro. And I really appreciate how warm and just welcoming you have been, Mr. Herzog. I've always been kind of afraid of you. I mean, this intro is maybe even part of that reason. You always seem like a terrifying man to me before knowing you, but now speaking to you, you seem like such a warm and open man. By the way, keep your eye on the screen. Boom, that's mummy vag right there. That was mummy vagina. And what kind of horror film gives you the opportunity to say the words mummy vagina? First of all, those are real mummies. You probably already know this because hopefully you've already seen this movie. Those are actual corpses that have been mummified. Those are real dead people. That's not paper mache that's been painted to look like dead people. Those are real, actual dead people that Werner Herzog moved, put into place, and then filmed himself. Now, what is the point of opening the film with a whole bunch of corpses? Let me tell you. The point of opening the film with a whole bunch of corpses like this is to begin with your introduction, just like you're writing a paper. You know, you begin with your introduction. The thesis statement is death. And you see all of these mummies' faces. This isn't like a placid, like grandma in her coffin looking, you know, peaceful and at rest. These faces are contorted and twisted. The mummies are sucked dry, they are desiccated, and that is on purpose. Let me tell you something. The vampire sucks the blood, sucks people dry. This is almost an image into the history of the Nosferatu, his lineup of victims over the years, and all of their faces again are contorted into these visages of like pain and anguish. Again, they do not appear to be at rest. They're not the type of images that you typically associate with like peace and peacefulness. These are twisted. Look at that face. I mean, look at the way that image. It's very much like the painting of Edvard Munch. And then we cut to the bat again. This one comes from like a nature video, I want to say. But we cut to this nice slow motion image of the bat. I mean, typically the bat flies, flaps its wings very quickly, but seeing it in slow motion again creates this like otherworldly, dreamlike. And then again, we see our first character of the film. This is Isabel Adjani playing Lucy Harker, which is kind of a departure from the Dracula text, but I'm going to try not to spend too much time talking about the Dracula text. Again, she's lit in such a way that, you know, the light is kind of falling across her. As you can see, she's illuminated. We also notice that she's wearing a cross around her neck. So we immediately get the idea that, you know, she's dressed in white. She's illuminated by this very pure lighting. She's wearing a cross. This is our one of our main characters, and she is a pure character, pure of heart. And we're immediately told that just by the images alone. But she wakes from a nightmare. Was her nightmare? Were we viewing her nightmare? Was she seeing in her dreams that line of corpses, and then the image of the bat flying in slow motion as if to come to her to take her to abscond with her? I mean, you really have to wonder if that is the purpose of that opening sequence. And I think it's very fair to say that Herzog is setting the tone, but then also, it sort of introduces us to a little bit of maybe what this character's like inner world is like, her own anxieties about the future as represented by these images of death, because this is the thing that we all fear, or at least most of us fear, this eventual demise that we must face. And I think this film is very much a meditation on that, and on that particular fear, as wrought by or as sort of symbolized by the Nosferatu story and character. Then we cut to this more. I mean, like, hear the music. You know, he creates a peaceful setting the next morning. The way that you wake up from a dream and you're kind of terrified by the nightmare, but then once you're out of it for a little bit, it almost feels silly. Like, I can't believe that was scary to me, but it kind of was. And you know, the sunshine, the daybreak kind of chases those fears, those existential dreads away. And we see that the next morning is much more idyllic. They're in a very nice home. This was very carefully sculpted by Herzog. Again, with the light, the windows that allow in all of this natural light. Again, um, this sort of pastoral imagery. You can see through the window the images of flowers growing outside their home and all of this natural light that bathes their home. It does create this sense that they have this idyllic existence as husband and wife, that they're very happy together and that they enjoy this natural beauty that was the world a couple hundred years ago, 19th century. I believe this is probably meant to be not 200 years ago, but more later 19th century Germany. But again, we don't see any real evidence of modernity here. We see glass and brick and stuff like that, but everything's horse drawn. All the coaches, the costuming is splendid. And Bruno Ganz, he's playing Jonathan Harker, one of the main characters in the Dracula story. He's employed by Renfield in this tale. Not in all tales, he's not always employed. Renfield is not always his employer. Frankly, I don't think Renfield is a very, I don't know, reliable employer. He's batshit crazy in all versions, and in this version,
something I don't dare trust to anyone else.
he's stunningly played. I mean, that laugh, that it's so unsettling. Again, it's like, why would this person be in charge of such an important operation? How does this guy become the boss? But the funny thing is that it's really not supposed to make sense. It's meant to be dreamlike. That this kind of crazy character, he's crazed. I mean, he can barely contain his maniacal laughter.
But on the other hand, there will be a large commission.
That's a French actor, so you get a little bit of French accent, and I love it. Again, it's like otherworldly. It's strange.
Yeah.
Tonight I'm drinking Liquid Death, former sponsor. No, still current sponsor of Shit Happens When You Party Naked. I just don't ever do commercials for them because that's a Patreon only show, and I don't believe in advertising to people who are paying for the Patreon. So go get you some Liquid Death. I think it's a very appropriate thing to be drinking tonight. Rest in Peach. It's a peach flavored iced tea. It's got a little caffeine in it to keep me up too. So Renfield is bad shit. I think he's even missing some hair back there in the back. I mean, it is a really splendid performance. It's way over the top. So I will say that he's used sparingly here. Oh, Herzog, you got something to say about Renfield?
And of course, here is the character of Renfield. He is literally insane. He based his performance off of both myself and Klaus Kinski. It is a genius performance because he, of course, based it off of me, and I am a genius of Werner Herzog. His character is much like the profane modern-day appropriations of my work as seen in a film like Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix.
Okay.
Now, of course, portrayal such as that one by Joaquin in the Joker owes itself to my portrayal here of Renfield, because Renfield is the only character who sees the humor in this morbid situation. He sees the humor in the ultimate futility of life and all of the characters struggling to better themselves and to live in the sun amongst the lilies and the seabirds. And Renfield knows that the only thing awaiting them is death, and he sees the humor in that.
That's an interesting comparison to think of Renfield as like this nihilistic character who sees the humor in how senseless and meaningless life is and life can be. I guess I don't necessarily personally agree that life is meaningless, but certainly in a film like this, a nihilistic character sort of makes sense. And it's a very interesting to draw a comparison between like this Renfield character and his nihilism towards this imminent destruction that this town is facing, and more modern day kind of like taxi driver style nihilism. I think that's a very interesting comparison, maybe something to dig into there, Mr. Herzog. So Speaking of the seabirds, Mr. Herzog just mentioned.
Yes, yes, and you see them walking along the beach together.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I told him to grab Isabella Gianni's ass, but he refused several times. He would not touch her backside, despite every admonishment from me to do so.
Okay. I guess that makes sense if you're filming them from behind. You want a little booty grab him, but I feel like maybe Bruno Gans made the right call here to just not, because I think that really would have drawn our attention away from the lovingness of this scene. The scene is meant to be kind of the final tender moment between Lucy and her husband Jonathan before he leaves town, and after that, it's all downhill for them both,
I
unfortunately.
have to say this. Even if you think it's foolish, coming from a feeble, unprotected heart.
Yes.
She feels this sense of
I
dread.
feel it like a force.
She's sort of the foil to Renfield in that sense because Renfield knows what's coming and he's gleeful. He doesn't care. He's a complete nihilist. He doesn't care about what's going to happen, the loss of life. She, on the other hand, she doesn't know what's coming, but she has a sense of dread, possibly informed by a dream of the previous night, possibly. Um, so her sense of dread is the opposite of Renfield kind of meeting things with this humor.
Lucy is the dearest thing in the world.
Of course,
Take care of her.
the first time we took this was the second take, but the first take, the horse took a shit right in front of the camera.
For real?
The first time the first take that we tried to capture of this particular goodbye, as Jonathan is bidding his goodbyes to his friends and his wife. Of course, the horse saw fit in that moment to raise his tail and to shit, to defecate all over the screen. I had that horse killed and replaced by the horse that we see here in the second take. Let it never be said that on one of my sets that we were kind to animals, because we were not. We killed every animal on the set. We killed, we butchered, we ate some of them, the others we left in the sun to rot.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that horse took a shit. I mean, I guess that's, you're working with livestock. It's not like you can ask the horse not to poop while the camera's rolling. That horse doesn't understand. So the horse shit during the filming of that particular scene, which is otherwise a very loving goodbye as Jonathan bids goodbye to this this town. Of course, at the time, we're watching a period piece, but at that time, that was modernity to these characters. So I think in some ways, this film, one of the themes of this film is the juxtaposition of modernity and the sense of security that modernity gives us, and then a juxtaposition with the old ways of superstition, of that sort of primordial evil that Nosferatu represents, that Count Dracula represents in this film. Of course, in the original 22 version of Nosferatu, he's named Count Orlok because they didn't have permission to use Dracula shit by 1979. That had lapsed into the public domain. So they did use Dracula shit and all the Dracula names in this film. That's a small piece of trivia for you. I'll try to avoid trivia, but sometimes I'll say Count Orlok, in which case I'm referring to the character of the 1922 film. If I say Count Dracula, I'm referring to the vampire of this particular film. So, here he's already away from his town and sort of out in nature, and you have these more rural people here. I mean, they're gypsies. Of course, he's traveling from Germany in the north, right? I'll try to do this right for you guys, try to mirror this properly. He's traveling from Germany in the northwest, and he's traveling east towards inner Romania, where Transylvania is located. So he's encountering these gypsies, and
People
Uh,
always think that there's no humor in my films,
yeah.
especially this one, but I would like to point your attention to the goose that is sitting at the table there. The goose is trying to chatter along, but no one is paying attention to the goose. Ultimately, the goose's life is as futile as yours. That is truly funny, is it not?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I think what Herzog wants for us is to also try to appreciate some of the dark humor. I don't think there's any outright laughs in this film, but I think maybe a sense of dark humor. And I mean, maybe that is a reflection also of Herzog in Renfield, where he does see a bit of humor in the very grim outcome of this film. Hard for me to see humor in this film myself, but I guess that goose is kind of funny. The goose was like sitting right next to the dude at the table. You might have to rewind this. I didn't notice the goose at first either, but of course, all of these people are superstitious. These are rural people. These are not people of modernity, where the people of Wismark, which is the name of the German town that Jonathan Harker just left. I think it's also called Wisborg in the literature, but Wisborg, I think, is a fake town, and Wismark is the real version. I think I've got that right. But Wismark is the town in Germany that would be this hub, this very modern hub. It's located on the water, so it would be a trading port as well. And there would be a lot of people coming and going from the city. It would be as modern as any other town in Germany at that time or in Europe at that time. So these are the more rural people. They're away from the city. They're living as they've lived for many decades, possibly even centuries. And so um here is where that juxtaposition begins. You know, we have the modern day kind of erudite man in Jonathan who does not hold any superstitions. He doesn't believe in such things. And then he is now amongst these gypsies who very much do live these superstitions, and they very much believe that there is danger that awaits at the castle. Do not go to the castle. Don't go. Don't go. It's going to be bad for you. You're not going to come back. And they're right. I mean, factually, we learn that the gypsies are factually correct. So we do learn that that he should have heeded their warnings. We wouldn't have a movie if he did. Pardon me. We wouldn't have a movie if Jonathan heeded their warnings and turned around and went home. But um I think it is important, and I think it's a theme of this film, but I think it's also a theme of Dracula, the original Bram Stoker novel. That you know, there is this false sense of security that we have in modernity, that our modern towns and medicines and you know, scholarship and learning, and that all of the development, all of the technological and social development that we have somehow protects us, guards us against these things. Um, and I think what the characters learn is that no, it doesn't. It gives us a false sense of security. We have a false sense of security, but when something bad happens, when there is a violent shooting, for instance, that's in the news, it can be shocking for people because they have this sense of security that is violated by this mass shooter killing 22 people in Lewiston, Maine. So I think this film works to highlight that tendency in us to feel safe when in actuality we're not. And I mean, we spent several years in that pandemic, that COVID-19 pandemic, and I think that also was a reminder to people that despite modern medicine, we may be vulnerable. There are vulnerable populations to this disease, and that's a little frightening, I think. Um, and I think um, the vampire here, Nosferatu, in this film is likened to a virus. We have scenes upcoming that I'll discuss where I make that comparison. And modernity offers us things like vaccines that should keep us safe from viruses, and modern medicine that should keep us safe. And yet, cancers and viruses still exist. And so I think one of the themes of this film is that there are things in nature that threaten us. Now, here we see an interesting scene. This coachman refuses to take him to the castle. Jonathan needs a ride to the Borgo Pass, and the guy says, no, there's no road leading us to the Borgo Pass. We can't go there. And Jonathan says, well, just let me rent one of your horses. And the guy says, I don't have any horses. Can't you see? Jonathan makes this feeble attempt right here to touch the horse. He sort of pats the horse's nose and then takes his hand away. It's almost as if he doubted himself, like what he was seeing in that moment. Like, wait a second. I'm looking at a fucking horse. I'm fucking touching a fucking horse. This is a fucking horse. You got to tell me you got no fucking horses? The guy said, I don't have any horses, and there's no road going the way you want to go anyway. Not because any of that was true. He was telling lies, but what he was trying to tell Jonathan is, I ain't taking you there because I ain't going to be responsible. A, I don't want to get close enough to take you there. B, I don't want to be responsible for whatever happens to you once you get there. So Jonathan has to embark on foot. Again, he's regressing from the modernity of his hometown of Wismark, where there are carriages and there are horses. There's modern transportation to get where you need to go. And as he gets further and further from that town to, like, what's that the other end of the spectrum is this dilapidated Carpathian Transylvanian castle of Castle Dracula. As he gets closer to that end of the spectrum, he has to almost shed these conveniences of his modernity of his town. So he doesn't even have a horse to ride at this point, and he has to go on foot as ancient humans would have done prior to the domestication of horses. So it is kind of interesting. This is like very much back to nature. And Herzog spends time here in Jonathan's approach to the castle. It is a slow and contemplative journey, both for us as the viewer, because we get these long takes and shots where he's meditating on this journey Harker's making, but obviously you can see Harker is a little trepidatious as well, and he's sort of taking his time. He's stopping to look around him at the river that flows by, and so he's, it's not like he's jogging up to the castle. He's also sort of slowed by this sort of dread that hangs over us. And we hear that in Popol Vuh's soundtrack here as well. We hear that, this dread, that it sort of hangs over this landscape. It's not a particularly inviting landscape, right? It's not like this beautiful meadow with the sun rising and butterflies and birds. It's jagged rocks. It's, he's having to climb over these big, large outcroppings. A fall would be disastrous. I mean, he'd be terribly injured. And, the river rushes by. If he were to fall into that, he would be swept away, possibly drown. So, again, we do have this several minute long segment of him traveling into the past. Not literally, but certainly very figuratively and almost literally, because he's traveling to this castle that's no doubt hundreds of years old, that is very dilapidated, as we're going to see in a shot coming up. But it reveals itself from this mist that we are just seeing. And again, it is almost like he's traveling into the past. It works as a time travel sequence. He has to go through this fog and this mist into the past, into this place where his sense of security from his modernity and his city, it's stripped away from him, and he's no longer secure. He's in these wild Carpathians. They're populated by wolves and bats, the children of the night, as Count Dracula is going to refer to them in a few minutes. And the music rises here. Doesn't it sound a bit more hopeful, a little less ominous? He's at the precipice. Literally, he's standing on top of a mountain, sitting on top of a mountain, looking over this precipice. He's on the borderline, and he's about to cross over, right? And we see the sun setting. We see the clouds coming in to cover up the light, taking away the light, bringing the darkness and the night. and it is this music that shepherds our transition into this world of the past, but also this world of horror. He's leaving behind that sunny morning where he's having breakfast with his wife and the kittens are playing and the nice pastoral music is going and the flowers are. He is now crossing over. This film is does present us with um a lot of dichotomies, a lot of polar opposites. We see there Count Castle Dracula. This is the place that Count Dracula inhabits. And look at it. It's a dilapidated ruin. It's a figment of our imagination. It's a dreamlike. And here, with that cut, we move to a very, like the very first of our really intense dreamlike sequences. And this sort of becomes more and more of this fever dream as he's taken from his city of Wismark in Germany and walking through this landscape that feels untouched by man, at least, going back hundreds, maybe thousands of years, untouched. Now he's met by this carriage. This is kind of true to Stoker's novel as well. It's this otherworldly kind of carriage. And if you've seen the Francis Ford Coppola version of this film, you know he's ushered into this carriage by a very strange driver who might be a creature. Here we don't see much of the driver, but we do see this carriage that is actually a hearse. So the symbolism is quite clear there that Jonathan getting into this hearse to take him up to Dracula's castle, he's a dead man walking. I mean, he very much is, and very much in this version of the film, as we're going to see in this film's twist ending that is completely unique to this film, does not exist in any of the other Dracula media. And I think Herzog's a genius for it. But I think the imagery of the hearse carriage is a pretty, on the nose kind of image. That Harker has to ride in it in order to approach Dracula's castle. It truly is a transition. I mean, this is a transitionary moment in the film. And the music, hear the music for a moment. That's Wagner, another German composer. Of course, Herzog is going to use the German composer. And it's here that we meet Count Dracula for the first time as a imposing silhouette.
Count Dracula.
Here is the first appearance of our Count Dracula, played by the inimitable Klaus Kinski, freakish man,
Thank you.
in and out of costume.
Wow.
You must be tired and hungry.
I think one thing that stands out about this film, it's not just the symbolism. Of course, the symbolism and allegory I think are important in this film, but not necessarily entirely unique to it. We can talk about Dracula as a predator or even as a parasite in other versions of the Dracula film and books. But in this film, I think it does feature my favorite portrayal of Dracula and of any kind of like a master vampire, because his Kinski is obviously Kinski is Kinski, right? I mean, that's like the nice way of saying this guy's possibly insane, probably a complete asshole, maybe even a felon, but an artist. And I think, his portrayal of Nosferatu is
Yes, yes.
it is dreamlike. Listen to the delivery of the dialogue.
Please. I'm afraid you must sup alone. It's nearly midnight, and I partake of nothing at this hour.
It's melancholy. It's contemplative. It's not particularly menacing, although he does present a terrifying image. Look at the claws and the way he moves his hand to grip things, the way the way he mobilizes his fingers. He locks eyes on Jonathan. Look, he's not even watching where he's pouring. He never looks away from Jonathan, even as he pours the liquid. He's making contact with Jonathan because Jonathan's food for him. He's thinking, that guy's a whole ass fucking smash burger, double patties with cheese. I got fucking onions on that motherfucker. He's just looking at Jonathan like, I haven't had a bite in a while, dog, and I'm about to fucking do it on your fucking face. I'm about to eat this motherfucker. But he's got to get through the niceties. He's got to sign the contracts, the paperwork, etc. And just the way he's just silently staring at Jonathan. It is Here we get this wonderful cutaway to him as he delivers this line.
Listen. Listen. The children of the night make their music.
I mean, that's again, it's creepy the way he appreciates the wolves, the children of the night, and they're making music. But that cutaway to him is another great example of the use of lighting in this film. I've discussed that in the opening shot of Isabella Johnny sitting up in bed as she kind of comes into that light, and the way that light frames her against this dark background. She stands at relief. Here he is again. The background is almost a pure black, and his clothing is black. So really, his head is kind of floating in this sea of blackness and darkness. It highlights his performance. I mean, just like any cut to a close up of of an individual's face is meant to highlight their emotions and show us the acting, the portrayal of that person. But then, here it is also to create this horrific image of Dracula's head floating in the darkness, so that it seems unhinged and suspended and not resting on the ground. And of course, the high contrast between the pallor of his skin and the darkness of the background creates such a beautiful image that's just off center enough. It's not symmetrical. He's not dead center in the frame, but he's off kilter just a little bit in that frame. And it's just a beautiful composition of an image in a film that's kind of spare on dialogue. This is not a dialogue heavy film. And of course, he's got some creepy ass fucking clock with the Grim Reaper going across it at midnight. It has just struck midnight. Look at that. I mean, and that's, you have to appreciate an older film like this too for its complete and utter lack of any kind of CGI. I mean, there's no special effects here in this film. This is not an effects film at all. There's makeup involved, of course, right? Primarily with Nosferatu with Klaus Kinski, but here just shit just gets even weirder and creepier, right? This of course does occur in the original source material. This happens in the Nosferatu of 1922 as well, and Count Orlok in that film is again drawn to the blood. He can't resist the blood, like an infectious agent finding its destination. I mean, like a bloodborne pathogen. I mean, Dracula is compelled. He can't resist. Here he becomes menacing immediately. Right here, knocks that chair over. I love this. He goes from this kind of weird, kind of trying to hold back to this. He's coiled like a viper, right? He strikes quickly. The teeth, you'll note that his teeth have this sort of horrific, a lot of vampire movies, they have the sharp canines, but they're set amongst normal teeth, usually brilliantly white and perfect. So they're not horrific. They allow us to be attracted to that handsome vampire character. In this film, the vampire is not in any way, shape, or form handsome or attractive. We, as the audience and the characters, are not drawn to him in the way that more modern vampire films set the vampire up as this sexual creature, but not just as like a predator, sexual predator, but as this sort of object of our desire too, as if we are the moth drawn to his flame. And it's the opposite in this film, as we'll see with the ending, and I'll speak more of it then. But the way he has those teeth, they are like a viper, like a poisonous snake with those teeth. When he bears them, the way they look, the way they appear, he does seem like a predator, and he does seem like one that's coiled to strike. I think the the metaphor of the viper or the poisonous snake, I think, is a very apt one for him, because you may be safe from this thing when it's far away, but when you're close to this thing, it's going to do its job. It's going to do its job on you. I don't know how the fuck he fell asleep in that chair. Let's be real here. That looks like the most uncomfortable chair in the world. Also, this broad set her bed up in the one spot where like the street light is coming in the window perfectly to be perfectly lit. It is a reminder of the artifice of this as a film. I mean, they clearly set a light up to shine right there across her face and shoulders, showing us her hair. Again, she's sleeping peacefully. That light shows us. But then this bat comes into her room. And much like with Dracula, there's a background around her. We get a little bit more of her background because of the lighting. But again, it's darkened around her, and she's not as pale as Dracula, but she will become more pale as the film goes. She does have a bit of a transformation throughout this film, and she grows more like the vampire, at least in her pallor, as the film goes on. But she does seem to have a psychic connection here, and that is also maintained from the 1922 version of Nosferatu, that there does seem to be this weird kind of, she has this sense for Jonathan being in trouble, but she also has this strange connection to Dracula now as well. She could sense with foreboding that Dracula was coming even before Jonathan was sent to offer him paperwork to sell him this house in Wismark. Jonathan here will become more pale as well. He's going to become more and more sick as we go throughout this film, and that's again in keeping with this symbolism of Dracula as this this agent of disease, almost like a parasite. The way a parasite robs someone of their health, and over time they sort of wither away from disease. He's sort of like this, almost like this virus that spreads, and we'll see the spread of that with the twist ending. I think that Herzog really kind of nails the analogy with that twist ending that he invented for this film of the this vampire as a virus, because of course we know that viruses are communicable. I'll speak more on that when we get to the end here. Here in the daylight, I mean, you do get to see a little bit more of Dracula's castle, and as we saw with the shot before Harker arrived, it's a ramshackle. It's there's nothing particularly opulent about this castle. It's, you imagine castles, you imagine kings and nobility living in castles, and kings and nobility having wealth and resources, and this place really does look quite shabby. It looks like a haunted house. I know this is not a haunted house film. I believe that the Dracula, the vampire type of mythos, kind of predates that at least a little bit. I think the haunted house type of fiction did become a little bit more popular during Victorian times, which was preceding Dracula. But certainly, like, this element that this house, there's no ghosts here, but there is an undead vampire who inhabits this place, and it's empty of any other life, and you see that it looks completely unlived. Look at the cobwebs stuck to everything, how empty the place is, how devoid of life it is. And I think again, that's on purpose. It sets that foreboding tone, that Jonathan's in some trouble, but also that this place is empty. It's been stripped dry. You can imagine it as sort of the castle equivalent of those desiccated mummies that we saw at the beginning. They've been sucked dry, and they're of no more use to the vampire. So he abandons them in the crypts, in those underground, crypts where we see them in the beginning of the film. This castle's almost the same, right? There's no reason for Dracula to maintain or upkeep this place, despite being the owner. He'll simply move on to another town. There's nothing here anymore for him, and so he will he'll move on to Wismark. He's attracted to the life like a moth to the flame. Dracula is, clearly Jonathan has been bitten. This is creepy too, because you think there's really, like, where the fuck, there's nobody in this castle, nobody in this fucking castle, but then there's this one boy, this Romanian gypsy boy, playing the violin and not doing a great job of it, but that's what makes it creepier and more haunting. Like, there's just this one boy that comes out during the day to play the violin, and it's really, again, kind of creepy, kind of unsettling. Doesn't make a lot of logical sense that there's like one human living here and it's an 8-year-old. But I mean, this as the soundtrack to exploring Dracula's castle, that it's this weird ghost town. Did he hallucinate the night before? He looked at his thumb. He saw that his cut was still there. There was food laid out for him. So he's not entirely convinced that he's dreaming, but he doesn't seem to be entirely convinced that he's not dreaming, that he's not hallucinating this. We get a cut to the exterior of the castle once again. it shows us how ramshackle and run down it is. It is desiccated like the mummies from the beginning of the film, and there's not much left here. And it also shows this passage of time throughout the day. Uh, Really effective scene to kind of set the tone of who Dracula is. And I think Harker, it's dawning on him that Harker might be a vampire that he read about. Of course, in the earlier scene a few minutes ago when he was reading about vampires, he kind of laughs it off. It's a silly superstition of these gypsy people. But um, over the next several minutes of the film, he is coming to terms with the fact that perhaps all of this modern science and scientific learning and knowledge that they have in the modern cities of 19th century Germany is not all of the learning that there is, and there are things out there that have not been properly scientifically studied. We'll see that in Van Helsing's character too, who's transformed in this film into something of kind of an ineffective. He's not the Van Helsing that we know from Coppola's version of the film or from even the book, where he's capable and filled with knowledge of vampires. Here, he's just kind of this ineffective. He, I'll speak more about Van Helsing when we get there. I should hold off until we actually see Van Helsing on the screen because I have thoughts, and I think Herzog it is a particular sign of his genius that he does recraft the Van Helsing character for this film.
Of course, yes, I did think of that, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Herzog did consider that. Again, we see Dracula here in the nighttime, illuminated by just a bit of candlelight, but set against this study, I guess. This is where they're conducting their business. It makes sense. It looks like it did more or less in the Francis Ford Coppola version as well as the 1922 Nosferatu. But again, how odd would it be to see Count Orlok? I mean, excuse me, Count Dracula in the daytime. The scenes of Wismark that we see of Lucy walking along the beach.
I love the darkness and the shadows.
He admits he likes the darkness and
I
the
can be
shadows.
alone with my thoughts.
Again
I'm
in
the
this film,
descendant of an old family.
Dracula is not necessarily an enviable character. I think something that they've done in
Profound
more recent films, as well as in the Francis Ford Coppola version. I mean, they make Gary Oldman seem he doesn't seem like a young man. He's not like Twilight vampire. Um, but he's not Vampire Diaries, but he is, when he appears in London to Mina, he is a younger man. He is dapper. He is a suave gentleman, and he's desirable in that sense. Of course, we moved on to stuff like Twilight and the Vampire Diaries, where nowadays it is sparkly vampire fiction being sold to tweens with a lot of romance packed in. But I have to appreciate this as a horror film. We must take a horror and a horrific approach to the antagonist in Dracula. We have to see him as this ugly creature. As I mentioned before, he's not attractive. He is the moth drawn to the flame. I mean, he's about to notice Lucy's photograph here. See how he springs at that photograph. I mean, he absolutely springs on it so fast, and he looks at Lucy's image. Suddenly, he's motivated to get the hell out of Carpathians and get to Wismark. Jonathan's weirded out because that's odd. Like, don't tell me you're gonna jack off to my wife tonight, dude. That's fucking weird. All right. I don't want anybody telling me my wife is hot and they're jacking off to him. Don't even breathe that heavy when we talk about my wife because that's just gross.
It's a small matter between gentlemen. I accept whatever you find is just.
So, Dracula's saying, I'm in. For that neck, I'm in. He doesn't admire her neckline in this film. I think that happened in the 22 version. It's pretty silly. But admiring her neck means I just want to like suck her blood. Nosferatu is the moth drawn to Lucy's flame in this film. He's drawn out by her purity. He was just saying that life is long when you're immortal, and So this theme of this existential dread experienced by Dracula is explored in this film. Unlike other vampire stories, it does explore this desire that Dracula has, that he wants this thing that he can never have. And I think we're going to see that with his interactions with Lucy throughout this film. I'll mention it some more. I'll talk about that as another theme. It's not just modernity juxtaposed with superstition and the old juxtaposed with the new, Carpathians, ramshackle castle versus the modern metropolitan Wismark, but it's also this, the nature of the vampire being this great corrupter. The virus wants to live on in a human host, and yet it kills its human host. It is maybe a grand irony is part of the theme of this film, is that Dracula wants something that he can't have. And in the 22 version, he really just wants to kind of feed on the Lucy character, the Eileen character in 22, Murnau's Nosferatu. But here it's like his desire for Lucy is more generalized. He wants Lucy. Does he want her sexually? Does he want to feed on her? Does he want to marry her and live with her as his vampire bride? We've seen these themes play out in other Dracula films, and here it's much more ambiguous. We know that he wants Lucy. In his first conversation with Lucy, we're going to get a little bit more of an idea of his motivation to be near her. What an image of him coming out of the darkness. What a fucking image. I mean, and then here, as he advances, this is the homage to Murnau here, the way he's holding his hands. He's kind of holding his hands in this weird angle with the nails out. And look at him advance slowly on Jonathan. He's not walking. They've got him on something. They've got him on a dolly or something. Do you see how he floats across the floor? Again, never breaking eye contact with Harker. He's done his business to Harker, so Harker is now disposable. He's expendable. And Dracula is going to treat him as such. But Dracula doesn't walk. You don't see him like step, step, step. The bouncing lilt that people make when they step, because the legs get further apart and then they get closer together. So your head kind of bobs a little as you walk. Here, he moved slowly. He glid in this very unnatural way. And he menaces Jonathan very slowly. And at the same time, we see Lucy sleepwalking again, kind of expounding on this otherworldly, almost psychic connection to Dracula. Like, even as Dracula kind of advances on Harker, we see Lucy sleepwalking. And luckily, the friends that Harker left her with catch her, and like before she sleepwalks into the fucking river or something like that, gets washed away. But obviously, she's kind of suffering from a little illness here. We see Van Helsing for the first time. We get to see Van Helsing, and she screams out for Jonathan, and it's almost as if we get this Kuleshov effect. This is a classic Kuleshov effect where we cut back to Dracula thousands of miles away. There's no way he could have possibly heard Lucy calling. It's not like he's in the next room, but it works as if he's in the next room, right? He looks up as soon as she calls out for Jonathan. She's worried for her husband, and it's almost as if Nosferatu hears her. He looks up from his midnight snack, as it were, his meal, as it were. And it's a pretty cool way of doing that. Like, almost as if, dude, there is this connection.
But I don't think it is really that.
Of course, yes. I did think of that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's genius of you, Mr. Herzog. It is genius. We get to see Van Helsing there as the doctor attending to Lucy. That's our first introduction to Van Helsing. He is a more traditional MD of the times. He insists on studying things scientifically and in broadening knowledge in this scientific method, the Western method. And we see some friction with that method in Lucy later. And now Lucy, I mean, Jonathan is very much driving the plot now. I mean, he's the main character for the first half of the film, but as he is now bitten by Dracula, he's infected. He's going to grow more and more sick as we watch him, and And he will become less and less the driving force of the film as we transition to more of Dracula driving the narrative and Lucy, especially. And that's a big departure, I think, and a very feminist move for this film to make, to reposition the Mina slash Lucy character as the sort of driving force and primary protagonist of the film, at least during its second half, that she really does kind of drive the film. I think it's funny that, um, Jonathan drives the film in the first half, and it's really his sort of greed, almost, for lack of a better word. He wants to get a better house for Lucy. He says that at the beginning of the film. He wants to get a better house for Lucy. They've got a beautiful house, but he's driven for more, 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 and that drives him to his end. He accepts this mission to the Carpathians, and of course meets his end here. But like, look at that as he removes that coffin lid, and Dracula's there sleeping with his eyes open. He's got to look corpse-like, doesn't he? With the eyes open is far more unsettling. Again, like a dream, he finds him there. And if only he had finished him off with a stake to the heart then and there, it seems like Dracula was not prepared to defend himself in that moment. And Jonathan maybe could have taken care of things, but also, an homage to Murnau, we see Dracula loading the coffins of dirt onto the coach, and then like putting himself in one of them. Gosh, that's just creepy. And then it's askew. We're also looking at this sort of as Jonathan seeing it, and it's happening sideways on the screen. So it gives us this perspective of Jonathan from the window, but then also it sort of makes the whole thing seem weird. It's an odd angle to see that action take place. And so it does enhance the kind of weird, dreamlike, odd nature of this whole experience. Um, it's obvious to us now that Jonathan is trapped here in this castle. He's not a guest of Dracula. He is captive, and he was not meant to ever get free. I think that's obvious in other versions of the story in Bram Stoker's original novel, as well as the Coppola version of Dracula. It's obvious that Harker was meant to meet his end there as the plaything of the female vampires. That they were just meant to drain him and play with him and discard him when they were all done with him. And here it was Dracula had no concern for Harker anymore. Um, does Dracula have reason to believe that Harker would also become a vampire? I mean, that does tend to be how these things spread, and Dracula certainly been around long enough. He ought to know. In this film, unlike the earlier versions, the book, as well as the not earlier version of the film, the later version of the Coppola film, Dracula does not have any brides. There are no vampire women prowling his castle. I mean, his castle is deserted, with the exception of him and the weird Romani kid playing the fucking violin, which also woke Jonathan up. And again, you got to ask yourself: is that boy really there? Is Jonathan hallucinating him? Is that a ghost of one of the vampire's victims that haunts the halls? I mean, it's really Jonathan doesn't do shit to rescue that kid either. It's not like, oh, kid, we got to get the fuck out of here because it's a vampire castle. Let's get the fuck out of here. It's just, he just wakes up at the feet of a gypsy kid playing the violin. And there is no question, like, who is this boy? What is he doing here? Is he real? Is he fake? Is he hallucination? Um, you know, it's really just there to enhance the otherworldly feeling of the film, the nature and the feel of the film as being like strange, odd, otherworldly. And it's here that we start to get the juxtaposition of Dracula as a curse, a pestilence, a virus, something from the old world, a plague brought into the new world. The juxtaposition of his dilapidated rural castle and here the modern world, the interface being the voyage that he's taking aboard this very modern ship. I can't believe they agreed to bring the dirt there. There's supposedly bringing it there for some scientific research, but it's obviously filled with rats. There's Herzog's feet right there. Um, and you know, Dracula obviously making that transition back into the modern world, and what we see is similar to other Dracula fiction in that he brings with him this curse that he carries. In Coppola's later version, it's not as widespread. It doesn't affect all of London. It really just affects his immediate victims. But what we get here, I think, is a little bit more allegorical. It's more symbolic of the fears of the age that the plague would resurface, and that Dracula's presence isn't just a threat to Lucy and her immediate circle here, but it's also a threat to everyone in the vicinity of this vampire, this Nosferatu character.
Of course, yes, I did think of that. Yes.
Of course you did. Of course you did. All of this film is very well planned. Here we're going to see more of Van Helsing. He's not brought in to cure anything or help fight vampires at all. He's a man of science. He's a man of medicine, and he regards vampires as a superstition. We're going to get a little bit more Renfield here. Renfield has been committed. As in the book, he's trying to consume living creatures of small to larger stature in hopes of consuming their life force or the life energy. I don't know why you can't just go have like fucking grilled chicken breast sandwich, dog, because you know, if it's all about consuming animals to consume their life energy, I would think like you know, grilled chicken kebab would be like a lot better than eating live flies. But here he attacks I can't believe that guy turned his back on him. But here we're seeing how ineffective and useless Van Helsing is. You know, when Renfield attacks the guard, we see these other guards having to come help. But Van Helsing is just standing there kind of touching his face or clasping his hands together, kind of reaching out impotently. He's completely useless, right? And that's on purpose. Now, in the original Dracula tale, Van Helsing is an expert in vampirism. He knows everything. He supplies our characters with knowledge and strategy. He is, bar none, the most useful character. And in this adaptation, he's made the most useless character. He can do nothing in the face of this evil. Again, he can treat a patient medically, but this is a plague that he can do nothing against. He cannot stand against this plague. And we see that in that scene, how ineffective he is. He's just going to grab his face. He's just going to grab his little face while this craziness happens. He's not going to jump in and lend a hand. He's not a man of action. He's not a decisive person at all. I don't know who the fuck buries dead people on a fucking sand dune, because those motherfuckers are washing out at high tide, but it does look creepy. I mean, it makes for a good creepy visual with the headstones askew, but absolutely not a practical place to bury people at all. Like, you're just going to think, let's bury them by the sea. That's great. How about cremate them and bury their ashes at sea if you want to have that idyllic resting place for them? But don't just fucking like, let's just dig a hole in this fucking, see this big mound of fucking sand? Yeah, surely that's not going to erode or wash away when the fucking tide washes in, or there's a fucking big ass wave or tsunami or some storm. Hurricane comes, and surely it's not going to wash all the fucking coffins back up. It would. Jonathan here, it's interesting. We presume that he is motivated to get back to, despite his injury, despite his illness, he's motivated to get back to Germany because he wants to protect Lucy. That's what he says as he's creating his makeshift rope to escape Dracula's castle, is that he's got to go save Lucy. Lucy's in danger. But he may also be driven to Wismark for the same reason that Dracula is, that he's now transitioning into a Nosferatu himself, and that he's drawn by the life of the people there, the victims, the ready victims. There's no one for him at the castle, so he has to embark on this journey. He has to pursue. Is he pursuing Dracula, or is he simply following Dracula in a sensible manner, because that's where the vampires go to feast? Vampires got to live near people. Got nothing else to eat otherwise. And yet we don't know this yet. I mean, obviously we know this. We've seen the film before. Hopefully you've seen this film before. Otherwise, I just spoiled the fuck out of a twist ending. Also, this movie's been out since 79, and you should never watch an audio commentary for your first viewing. You should always watch the film first, then watch the audio commentary. Get acquainted with the actual content of the film and the dialogue before you listen to somebody talk over it. Even though it's educational and it can enhance your appreciation of the film. Here, Lucy is speaking to Renfield. Renfield is the last person who kind of saw Jonathan off, sent Jonathan on his way, and now she's really worried something happened, and she's creeped out by this guy. And he's kind of hitting his crescendo of insanity. Here we see him snatch the key away, and you have to appreciate his cunning in that moment. That he's just like really quick, grab the key. And he's going to let himself out. He's going to free himself. And, this character of Renfield with the laughing and stuff like that, I've heard people online say that it's a very annoying character. And I have to agree that you wouldn't want to follow this character for the full 2-hour film, right? It would be a very annoying character to have to follow for the whole film. This film is sort of punctuated with brief snippets of Renfield. So I think Herzog does the right thing by showing us this insane character, but then not going overboard, not bombarding us with this character, because otherwise that laughter would go from unsettling to very annoying. He's just in just enough of the film to again really kind of unsettle us. He's not meant to be a pleasant character, so the people online are kind of getting it wrong when they say he's annoying. Yeah, it's supposed to be like jarring. He's supposed to be jarring. He's supposed to be the human equivalent to nails on a chalkboard. Again, we see the bat coming. This is symbolic of Dracula. He's on his way. He's coming. They're coming to get you, Barbara. That kind of sense that there's this impending doom. And of course, he's terrorizing all of the sailors on the Demeter. It's the name of the ship. And he's killing them off in a way that you have to wonder if it's deliberate on his part, that will make people think that they died of the plague. The scientists who examine the bodies in a moment will doubt their very eyes. They don't think that a vampire has killed these people. They think that the plague aboard the boat was spread by the rats, and that the plague is what killed these people. So that could be a clever ploy on Dracula's part to prevent him from being noticed and found out. Or it could also just be the nature of the vampire, that he is himself a plague, and he can't help but to kill these people in a way that makes it obvious that they were killed by a plague, that plague being the vampire. There's no signs of, he doesn't pull their hearts out or something particularly violent. He simply drains them of their life essence and infects them, in the way that he was infected. Although Jonathan is really the only character that comes back as a vampire. I mean, I guess maybe Dracula drains all of these people like to death, and he does not do so with Jonathan Harker, and that enables Harker to sort of gestate this virus inside him and come back as a vampire at the end, where these guys just, he kills them, they bleed to death, and they die. And I love these scenes, scenes of foreboding. Lucy looking out the window, almost as if she's expecting this boat to arrive. Again, kind of similar to the Kuleshov effect, maybe not a traditional Kuleshov effect, but similar in that she's looking out the window, and then we cut to the boat, and the dead captain, slumped over his wheel, and somehow the boat still manages to find its intended port, but it sort of drifts. It's just this derelict vessel, just like the castle when Dracula left. It was this ramshackle, derelict, broken down, desiccated, sucked dry husk of a castle. Now we have this boat in the same state, that he just simply sucks all of the life out of it and then leaves it to nature to just blow this boat in to wherever he's going. And it reinforces this weird dreamlike that the boat still manages to find its port, and yet it's unmanned, it's unsteered. I guess maybe the captain's corpse was enough to keep it on course and not allow that wheel to turn too much. Or the wind just blew in just the right way for Nosferatu, or maybe Dracula has some control over nature a little bit in that way. But it's an interesting thing to think about. We get that image of the child sneezing. It's like this grim foreboding, foreshadowing of the pestilence that is to come. Everyone's going to get sick. This child sneezing. It's probably a little hay fever, but what is to come is that on steroids. And these guys again are useless. They want to fully check this ship, and yet they do nothing to quarantine its contents. They do nothing to prevent the plague from spreading. Of course, we have to wonder, is it the plague killing all of these people, or is it Dracula? Is it simply Dracula doing what Dracula does? And I think it may be Dracula doing what Dracula does. And this is really where the terror comes to Wismark. And this is where the nightmare goes from this foreign land that's far away. It's not a threat because it's way over there. It's like considering war. It's like this thing that happens way over there. It's all those, and it sucks for those people, but they're way over there. They're in the Middle East. They're in Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. They're not here. When the violence comes home, when there's a violent shooting, when there's a serial murder or something like that, and it comes home, then it becomes truly terrifying. And I think for the people of Wismark here, it's about to become real life. These rats are about to overrun the city. And of course, they will take the blame for all of the deaths because it will be presumed that the plague came with the rats. We know today, and at the time this film was released, of course, it was known that rats were the bearers of the plague. And we see the bite mark on his neck, and yet they sort of disregard this, and they say it's the plague. We know that Dracula drained this guy. We see it right there. Yeah, it's a mystery, motherfucker. There's 2 fucking marks in the guy's neck, and he's drained of blood. How's that a goddamn mystery? Did you go to fucking medical school? Anyway, Van Helsing ought to know better. Is the guy drained of blood, or is he not? Because if you drain someone of all of their blood, let me tell you something. They're going to be a fuck of a lot lighter. When you lift that corpse, it's going to be a lot fucking lighter because you just drained like half the fucking mass out the motherfucker. Maybe not half the mass, but a third. Regardless, you're going to expect the guy to weigh 150 pounds. You lift him up and he's about 100 pounds. You're going to say, wow, okay, damn, this dude is dry as fuck.
Sea high, making 40 knots towards Biscaya.
They look to the log, of course, to try to gain details on what's happening. And the log points them toward the plague, and they conclude it's the plague.
Could it be the plague?
And that's enough for them to freak the fuck out. They should have thought of the plague before they boarded the boat, quarantine that motherfucker. But, nope. And they leave the corpse. They say, go home quietly, please. Let's get out of here. Shut the doors and windows. Go into quarantine. And this should be familiar to us who have just lived through a COVID-19 kind of similar, stay home, board up your windows, social distance, stay away from people. You don't want to get sick. Don't go out in the world. Obviously in 1979, Herzog had no idea what the world was in store for in 2020 and 2021. But it is hard to watch this film now with that experience in my life and not draw a parallel at times to the recent pandemic. Of course, I first saw this film probably, I don't know, mid 2000s, so well before the COVID-19 pandemic. Here we this really kind of crazy shot of, this very high contrast lighting on Dracula's face, which is, of course, expertly done and very deliberate. We see him unloading these coffins again. They must be very heavy, solid wood construction and filled with dirt. and yet he lifts them with relative ease. And I think that is meant to show us that he is like unnaturally strong. So he traces his way through this graveyard, imagery of death, a vampire holding a coffin going through a graveyard. It's like, how over the top could you be with the imagery of death? And yet it still works. I think it's frightening. And he moves into this abbey that's, obviously it used to be a church. It's deconsecrated and it's a wreck. It's not a fancy spot for a nobleman to live. It's a decrepit building. There's still a few crosses on the wall, and he's going to notice them. He'll show a little distaste for the images of the holy. He kind of puts up his arm. He doesn't like it, but it's the type of thing that would ward him off, but obviously not the type of thing that would cause him to burst into flames like more modern vampire fiction sort of does. Like the cross can burn him if he touches it. And maybe that's the case here too. He never gets close enough really to touch it. Although we do see a vampire at the end touch a cross. And it's really more of a disdain for the religious icon and not or religious iconography and symbolism. It's not that it has any power over him. It's more like, I don't know. I don't want to look at this, Dracula moving into his new digs, and it's almost as if the clouds have fallen over the town. This is just outside the town. I believe this is Jonathan finally making his way home, but he's grown more ill than we last saw him, and it's unfortunate, but it's a sign of kind of where he's headed. It's a sign that Lucy was right to worry about Jonathan, and she was also right to worry about just this trip in general and what it meant for them personally, their family, as well as the town more broadly. But these gentlemen are ones that, I guess they found Jonathan somewhere and they're returning him home. He made it close enough that whoever stumbled upon him was able to return him to his home. But they deliver him quite ill and really just kind of out of his mind. You don't know if maybe that's like a fever has addled his brain or the virus or whatever. But whatever's wrong with Jonathan, it's clear that it's had a mental effect on him too. It's not just physical ailment, weakness, etc. But
we're delivering this man who seems to belong to this house.
I like how he's got his arms around Jonathan too. It's like he's trying to comfort him. It seems like very like almost loving, like I'm gonna put both my arms around you, buddy. But then it's also like I need to hold on to this motherfucker because he might go running off or something. It's almost like a little bit of that. But the way he pushes away Lucy,
Who's this woman?
he's like, I don't recognize this lady. The way he pushed her away, he's just kind of, get off of me, lady. Seems to be a continuity error there with his coat. He pushed that blanket off. You saw his trench coat. Then he pushes Lucy away, and now he's not wearing his trench coat. And maybe that came off with the blanket. It seems like that guy's holding it. So maybe it came off with the blanket or whatever. But that looked a lot like a continuity error there. Sorry, Herzog. You know,
Be a very severe brain fever.
very severe brain fever. That's what Van Helsing's come up with. I love medicine of the 19th century. I feel like my 4-year-old is qualified to be a doctor in the 19th century. Like, oh, it's clearly a brain fever. Where the fuck else are you going to get fevers, dog? Do you get like a toe fever? Do you get like a dick fever? Do you get like a fever in your hand? When you got a fever, that's in your fucking brain, dude. That's a reason why fevers are bad and you don't want them to get too high because it starts to cook your fucking body, including your fucking brain. I love it. It's like brain fever. Let's prescribe some morphine and cocaine mixed in with coca leaves. We call it Coca-Cola. Let's just have him drink this shit and get fucked up. When he comes back, brain fever will be gone. I love this image. He enters the screen. We get a kind of day for night image here. It's obviously the sky is illuminated a bit. It's not quite night, but it's obvious too that because everyone's gone home and boarded up the doors and windows, that Dracula now owns the streets. You know, the streets belong to him and they're deserted now. Of course, there are street lights. This is implying that it is quite late, or at least it's about to be, that middle of the night darkness, but not quite yet. And I do love him looking upon the town. It's like me when I get to the Golden Corral and looking around. No, not the Golden Corral. I don't like the Golden Corral. When I go to a nice Chinese buffet and I'm looking around, I'm like looking at all this stuff. I go into Fogo de Chao. I'm looking at all the meats there. That's what he's doing. He's at like his Nosferatu version of Fogo de Chao. He's seeing all these fucking meats. And he's like, I'm gonna eat that bitch. I'm gonna eat that dude. I'm gonna eat that bitch. That'll look good as fuck, dog. And this is just creepy too. He's lit in a cool kind of bluish lighting, which is very appropriate for his face and facial features and the makeup here. And he's looking in the window at this, this victim of his. He's got to be thinking like, wow, okay, you made it back. Hey, you're back too. He hasn't been back very long, but Dracula didn't beat him back by much, and Dracula took the aqueous route. But of course, Dracula went, around the continent of Europe to approach it through the Strait of Gibraltar, I think, or whatever, and it came in, from the north. Here's a great moment. This is just a great moment. Look how pale Lucy's looking now. She's grown far more pale again. She's lit almost exclusively Isabella Johnny. Now, of course, he doesn't have a reflection in the mirror, but we see his shadow. And then we see him enter from the left, and it's all done practically. And, filmmakers these days couldn't do this well with all the CG in the world. All the CG artists in the world couldn't make it as foreboding an image, because Lucy's acting in the mirror, of course, camera's positioned behind her. We see her acting in the mirror. We see nothing of Dracula except his shadow in the mirror. And it's just unsettling. It's in keeping with vampire lore. And it just creates this like horrific approach where you can see this thing coming, but you can't see this thing coming. Like you can see the shadow, the hint of it. And of course, her response is like exaggerated, but also like quite silent. Like she doesn't scream at any point, but you can see that she's like shocked and startled and terrified by the approach of this featureless, this shadow that doesn't appear in her mirror. And she gives this strange poetic dialogue here too, which is just weird.
Spin and reel in confusion. Time passes in blindness. Rivers flow without knowing their course. Only death is cruelly sure.
It's just an odd piece of dialogue, but obviously dreamlike as well.
Dying is cruelty against the unsuspecting. But death is not everything. It's more cruel not to be able to die. I wish I could partake.
So what Dracula's saying there, what Lucy says is that death is certain, and that nothing else in life is certain but death. And Dracula says, death is a cruelty when it happens to someone young, unsuspecting, when it strikes tragically. And again, it's a symbol of like gun violence and, shootings and murders and stuff that occur close to home that can be unsettling. And he says it is cruel for someone to be taken like that, but for someone to live forever, on and on and on and on, that's an even greater cruelty. And it expresses his kind of existential, this existential thing that he's kind of, I want to call it a crisis. It's not really a crisis, but it's this sort of this existence that he's lived that he's really grown very tired of, I guess. It's just this thing that, just kind of keeps going for him. And as he said to Jonathan Harker, it's almost a curse to be immortal and to not be able to die and to not be able to partake of this love between you and Jonathan. He says, I want to partake of this love between you and Jonathan. He wants to have this human experience. So in that exchange with him and Lucy, and she even bears her neck, she says, I'm not afraid of you. Right. And it works. It sort of scares him away. He doesn't want to kill Lucy. If he wanted to kill Lucy, he'd have done it then and there as she bared her neck for him. In what's really like some pretty glorious photography and cinematography. But he retreats in the sign of her bravery, and he understands that to attack her then would be to kill her, and he doesn't want to kill her. He wants to have this human experience that Lucy and Jonathan have. He expresses this desire to be with a person who loves him, to experience this love, rather than the loneliness and hunger, which are all he knows for eternity, for the hundreds of years that he's been in existence, or maybe thousands. I mean, it's not his origin is not expounded upon in this the way it is in Coppola's film, and in that regard, I think it's a strength of this film for him to be a bit mysterious in that his origin is unknown, and he may go back to time immemorial. I like to think of Dracula as this ancient, maybe almost Lovecraftian in that sense, horror. How cheesy is it for Renfield to like look back at the camera, to ham it up one last time for us, the viewer? I mean, that certainly wasn't for any other character. I mean, it was almost breaking the fourth wall. Like, look at me, I've escaped. Now I'm going to go wreak havoc. I mean, that really was for the audience. Closest we're going to get in this film to breaking of the fourth wall. Here's the transition to where Lucy kind of becomes the driving force in that last scene with her interacting with the Nosferatu. She has now become the driving force of this film, and its primary protagonist. She's educating herself via the book, because we don't have Van Helsing in this film in the way we do Stoker's original, to educate our characters to the ways of the vampire. Um, and he's kind of laughing. It's just like she's reading out loud a story to him that he takes some mirth in, now that he is transforming into this creature, and see how he's lit as well in the background. And then he just sort of springs to life in that moment, and then right back into his feverish, stupor, kind of in and out of consciousness, but just there long enough to laugh. But Lucy educates herself, and like those gypsy characters, she believes in the supernatural. She's kind of a foil to Helsing in that way, Van Helsing in that way too, where Van Helsing only puts his faith in the scientific and what can be proven via the scientific method. She is willing to trust in the old ways, and so she is a foil for both Dracula as well as for Van Helsing. And here we get the last of Renfield. Really, he's like, get the fuck off me. It's the disdain that he feels for this character is palpable and almost amusing.
To Riga. The army of rats and the Black Death are with you.
Oh, thy will be done. Amen. Amen.
So he sends Renfield away. He sends him north to Riga, and it's another German town, and it's like, sort of prepare the way for me. I'll be there soon. I'm done draining this town. I'll move on to Riga, and I'll meet you there. But it also is kind of his way of saying, like, dude, fuck off. Like, fuck off. Like, he, like, literally, fuck off. Like, he's very much like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, when he's like, fuck off, like kicking that guy away from him. That's what I think of every time I see that. He's like sort of just pushing Renfield off. As with an earlier scene, we see yet another scene of death in the town, of this line of characters who are.
Plague. What are you doing here?
I must go to the town council.
It's dissolved. It exists no more.
We get the sense here too that so many people have died that this entity, this social structure that we call a town, a village, a city, doesn't really exist anymore. It's sort of like you take enough cells away from the body and you don't really have a body anymore. You take enough tissue off the body and you don't have a body anymore. And so she's trying to convince these people that she knows what's going on, and just no one's interested in listening to her. And really, it is this dissolution of the town of Wismark as it sort of falls apart that really strikes home the dreamlike imagery and the horror. And she gets Van Helsing to listen to her, but again, he doesn't believe her. Her imagination. He says it himself. And that's kind of the undoing, right? Is that they don't recognize that they're being plagued by a vampire. Nosferatu is able to run free in the streets at night and take all of these victims. Look at him taking all of those victims of his thirst, and the town council being dissolved. They're all dead, or half of them are dead, and they don't have a town council anymore. There's no more leadership. Dracula has essentially decapitated this town, and it is true anarchy, and we're going to see that anarchy within this town develop as this plague that is the Nosferatu goes on. They think it's the Black Death, but of course, this plague is the Nosferatu that's feeding on them, and They will even go into their death throes in this dance macabre in a few minutes in a scene coming up.
To believe things which we know to be untrue. You must come with me and help me to crush this monster.
He ignores her pleas. Again, he's not going to be helpful to her. You saw him in that first scene. He couldn't even bring himself to help restrain Renfield. This guy is a pussy of the tallest order. And Van Helsing is completely neutered in this film, where he's a very potent character in other Dracula media, in the book or the original book, Ford Coppola film. He's completely impotent in this film. And so Lucy knows she must go alone. She is the sole protagonist of this film, where the original Dracula novel sort of focused on this band, this almost fellowship of people going to men going off to strike down Dracula and save Mina and avenge Lucy, etc. And this brothership is formed amongst the men, where they feel this sort of kinship with each other. That's an element of the original novel that is completely absent here. And it's more horrific. It's more horrific to be on your own than to have a band of people who understand you and believe you and have your back. I mean, Lucy is completely alone, as in a dream, as in a nightmare, where you find yourself alone amongst the terror of your nightmare. No one can help you. There's no one there to get your back. And that's what Lucy's experiencing here. Again, as this town unravels, it's completely unprepared for the vampire's presence. Um, and we get this very silent scene. It's not a lot of dialogue, but there's no music playing either. There's a little bit of nature sounds, a little bit of wildlife.
My medicine.
She realizes that Jonathan probably will never recognize her again, and yet she wants to get revenge for him. She wants to stamp out this vampire that took away her family and her happiness. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a very feminist move to take this story that focused on this band of men doing this thing to take care of and avenge the women in their life, these helpless women, that Herzog sort of flips that on its nose, and now you have this helpless man. Look at Dracula sort of fleeing, almost like he's drunk on blood, and he's just, it's like the sun's coming up, and I got to get home, and he's just running amok, literally running through the scene. He's running amok in this town, and this town is falling apart, and we see that he's just going house to house, murdering these people, draining them dry, murdering them, as this death, goes door to door. And it really is kind of like this good feminist vision that sort of empowers Lucy, that she's not like Captain Marvel here. She's not like punching through walls. I mean, she's capable in that she is resilient and self-reliant, and she finds a self-efficacy, and she arms herself with knowledge by reading the book. She's not like the Barbara character in the original Night of the Living Dead, where she's just PTSD and paralyzed with fear, this deer in headlights waiting to be devoured. It is interesting that she tries to enlist help, and when she finds none, she says, fuck it, I'll do it on my own. Fuck it. Fuck you, Helsing. Van Helsing, you pussy. I'll fucking go face the vampire by my damned self. And so, armed with just a little bit of like holy water and the communion wafers that have been sanctified, um, she is going to go try to find where Dracula is during the day. This is early morning, I believe. She's come out kind of just as Dracula has fled back home. She finds nothing. She finds his coffins, but she finds nothing but the dirt and the rats. But she decides to sanctify that dirt. It appears that Dracula's kind of placed his coffins strategically in different spots. So, he has many different refuges, and she takes these refuges away from him by spreading the Holy Communion there and kind of sanctifying this coffin. He can no longer find rest on that earth. That that earth is meant to be kind of this cursed earth that he's brought with him. And if she sprinkles this holy relic on it, then he can no longer take refuge there. It's no longer this cursed earth. So she's trying to find him. She's also trying to take away his refuge, and she's kind of slowly doing so. She doesn't really know where to look for him. And again, he's spread these coffins kind of out strategically, so she's got to search. And here we see again this kind of anarchy that's spread. There are now bonfires in the middle of the town square. Is that a dead lady, or is she just taking a nap? I'm choosing to believe that that's just a corpse of a lady that sat down as she was mourning and succumbed to the plague. And there she is, dead. And the livestock roams amongst the city. And it really just kind of shows us that this is no longer a town of law and order. This is now a village that has been destroyed. There are a few survivors that remain. Those that do are afflicted. And listen to this dirge that comes on now as Lucy wanders amongst the town. There's a monk praying over a coffin, and again, it's just otherworldly dance macabre happening in the background. And it's taken from medieval folklore and superstition and things that actually did occur with this dance macabre. And the dirge that plays as Lucy surveys the wreckage and the death that has come to the city, and these people that are just dancing because fuck it, why not? I mean, that's really the dance macabre, is fuck it, why not? We're all going to die, and these may be our final moments, and just fuck it, let me just get up and I'm just going to get up and dance. And it's this juxtaposition between the merrymaking and the death that really makes this, and the dirge that's playing now too, this solemn hymn that is juxtaposed with these images of merriment. We don't hear any of these characters making merry. We don't hear the instruments that they're playing, the dance that's occurring. We only hear this dirge, and they seem to be, I don't know, they're not unaware of the death, but they're willing to ignore it and do this dance macabre. This guy, I don't know if he's trying to slaughter this goat or make sweet, sweet love to this goat. He's mounting it, and it's again imagery that is meant to just be almost bewildering to her eyes. She wanders through it like a dream. Some of these characters sort of interact with her as if to be dance partners with her, but then also they sort of go about their way as she walks through them. They're willing to ignore her and allow her to pass. And again, very dreamlike. Rats everywhere. The dead are now in the street. No one's even burying. There's no one to bury these coffins. These coffins, which must have a corpse inside, are just sitting there. And just mere feet away, you have these people that are like dressed up. They're in their finery. They're even wearing these this kind of crown of flowers, you know, the symbol of life and of harvest. And it's there juxtaposed with all of this death.
We've all caught the plague. We must enjoy each day that's left.
And that character sort of sums it up. Look, we're surrounded by death. We haven't much time left either, as immediately we smash cut to the table now, without the people. The people have stripped away. I don't know if they've gone off to die or they've simply left the table to the rats, and the rats took it over. The plague overwhelms everything. And so that scene with that dirge, I mean, that is just, again, really drives home the wreck that is this town. And it seems like Lucy's the only one who's still trying to hold it together. There's nothing left for her to save. So I suppose she's just avenging her town and her husband, or trying to, against the vampire. And we're about to see how close to home it hits with her friend Mina here, having been killed by Nosferatu just the previous night. The body may even still be warm. Again, Lucy is just pale. Look at the pallor to her face and that black hair. It's perfect for the part, in my opinion. Um, you know, she looks like she should be a vampire herself. She's really the last person who's unafflicted.
We don't know exactly, except that this morning We took him to hospital.
Yeah.
We still have no explanation. The causes will be gone into with scientific thoroughness, leaving aside superstition and prejudice. The plague, we can most certainly rule that out.
So Van Helsing realizes that whatever killed Mina was not the plague. We can rule that out. You see the bloody wound on her neck, but then he also says we're going to go into this and with a scientific inquiry. We're not going to utilize any superstition. This was not a vampire that killed her, even though you can see two bloody bite marks on her fucking neck, and she's laying there dead with her eyes wide open. It certainly wasn't the plague, but it definitely wasn't a vampire either. Those are make believe. So again, it's sort of juxtaposes the idea of like a scientific development against the knowledge of the past, and saying maybe we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe we do gain new insight into the world with science, but then also perhaps um, there is something valid in the lessons of the past, as we're going to see from the Lucy character too. Again, Van Helsing, even as he acknowledges that it wasn't the plague that killed Mina, he's still completely zero fucking help. He's as useless as a third testicle. He's just a limp, flaccid dick just hanging out. He really only makes it to the end of the film so they can pin this weird murder on him and put this nice twist to the film, just in time for him to believe he's taken out. Now, Lucy knows what she must do. She seems to be beckoning Dracula from his window. She knows where he lives. Of course, he took possession. He signed for the large house across the street from where she lives. And here she is at her palest. I mean, she's the color of her clothing. She's the color of the bed. She's this white, and it's a symbol of purity, but it's also seems like she's a vampire. And here he is all of a sudden. We don't see him come to her. He's already in her room. He's already materialized. It's very much a jump cut. Um, like something experimental that we would have seen in the 60s. This experimental cinematography and cinema experimental montage is being used here. And she goes to protect herself, but then she very methodically puts her hand down. He sees her move her hands away. She's very much obviously offering herself up to Dracula. And this dude, I don't know what the fuck he is thinking, but he's like, you know, let's get a look at the puss. Let me take a look at your vagina. The second time we've ever spoken and ever met, I'm gonna just like pull this up and take a look at your whole ass hoo ha. Let's see if you're shaving down there. Um, but there's a sensualness to this, where he's sort of exposing her, and he's also touching her leg, and she sort of draws him away, and so you could see her the whiteness. I mean, she's almost more pale than he is at this point. He's drained so much blood from the living that they've almost reversed, right? Like he's gotten more color to him as he's drained this whole town. He's filled with blood, but then she's become more pale as she's sort of transformed as well, and bares her neck to him again. The idea is that she would draw him out into the sunlight and that he would be killed. And look at this shit right here. I mean, he got his whole hand on that titty.
Here he comes to drain the life of
Yeah.
the one he loves. He
Yeah.
does take a look at her vagina there.
Yeah, he did
And
look at her
then
vagina.
I told Klaus several times not to grab her by the breast, and yet in every take, all 35 of them, he grabs
35?
a whole handful of titty, which
Yes, he does.
I do not believe that Isabella Gianni appreciated that very much, but there was no telling Klaus Kinski that he could not grab the titty. He was sucking her dry of her blood. He said, why would Nosferatu, why would the evil vampire, why would he stop at sucking her dry of blood and killing her? Why would he not cup her supple breasts as he did so? And I could not mount a convincing argument otherwise, so it remains in the film.
I mean, I guess that's a valid point that, if you're going to kill somebody, it's not worse to grab their titty. It seems like adding insult to injury. You're going to murder somebody. I'm also going to grab your titty while I'm doing it. but he got a handful of titty, and it almost is like he's a baby suckling at the breast, right? I mean, there's almost like this infantile, like he's almost like milk drunk. You've ever seen those kids that get all sleepy after they're all full of milk, and she draws him back in, and of course he can't resist. He's a glutton, and he's this creature that follows its nature, which is to drain the life force of this character. But then at the same time, it's like sensual. She's like the mother drawing the baby to her breast. He's like this milk drunk baby, and he's grabbing a titty. So I don't know if that's maybe symbolic, like the titty grabbing is supposed to be this symbol of like she's this mother giving him life. It's not milk, it's a different fluid, but is sort of symbolic that he draws life from the feminine, that as a female she is able to give out this life. And it's very interesting as an allegory there, and something that's not really thought of in other Dracula or vampire fiction, that she's sort of giving life as this mother figure, and that it drains her. Really, it's the ploy to kill him, and he's about to realize he's fucked. Listen to that birdie. Listen to that fucking morning birdie chirp. He's the only motherfucker still alive in this town. This little morning birdie chirping. We get to see Klaus finally. Kinski finally gets to do his like hammy acting here too. And again, it's kind of odd to see Dracula here in the light of day, but here it comes. The first morning rays of light are able to penetrate this creature of the night, and the juxtaposition is too much. He's finally soared too close to the sun, and it burned him up. The light has blinded his eyes, which is kind of cool to see, but it sort of like sucks inward all of this darkness as he doesn't shriek outwardly, but it's like it sucks all of this terror and darkness and death back into this corpse. And here he gets to act. Here, Kinski really gets to do his like over the top. He's able to writhe and really emote in a way that he wanted to, but he was sort of stifled by Herzog, and Herzog very much crafted this performance. Now, Lucy is able to pass away in peace. She is not afflicted by that plague. She neither dies of the plague, nor does she see herself become the villain. She dies at peace, having successfully completed her mission of avenging herself and her husband on the Nosferatu, on Count Dracula, ending in his death. And all of these men weren't able to do it, but the woman was. And again, it's a very feminist approach to Dracula's destruction. And so I think you have to appreciate this film if you have a feminist bent. Helsing's here just in time to realize, holy fuck, I was wrong and she was right. Look, just in time, everyone's dead. I should have believed her. I'm standing right in front of it. I mean, you really talk about waiting to see it to believe it, but that's how the scientific method works, isn't it? You have to make an observation. How can you possibly study something that you can't observe? And before that, he was not able to observe the vampire. It's like we weren't able to observe germs until we got microscopes, right? Like there might be some version of germ theory from ancient Greece, but it's sort of an allegory. And once we were able to observe these single-celled organisms, then we were able to expound upon germ theory. And it's not until he sees the vampire that he believes, but now he believes, and he's about to put the final stake into Count Dracula. And of course, Harker tries to stop this, but Harker cannot cross this threshold of the Holy Communion that Lucy left there. And the idea is that, on initial watch, you think she's putting this around him to protect him, to keep Nosferatu away from Harker. But really, the function is to protect others from Harker. He screams for help and then rats him out for murdering the Count. It's weird. Suddenly there's like a little, like some semblance of law and order. There's this like one last guy left in town, this constable with the receding hairline on the left there.
You're under arrest.
You're under arrest.
Dr. Van Helsing.
Ironic that the guy who puts the final stake through the vampire is actually arrested for the deed.
Never made an arrest. Then go and get the police.
And this 90-year-old man is supposed to make the arrest.
and take them
Except
out of prison.
there's nothing left of the police. There's nothing left of the town. There may be nothing left
Then
of
you
the
must
prison.
arrest him
There's no
yourself.
one there to keep him
After
in.
all, you're a town employee.
Then how should I do it? I need arms for it.
The idea being that,
Nevertheless, you'll arrest this man.
this guy on the left, he's got some sense of authority. I mean, he must be the last town councilman or whatever, but he does seem to be the last vestige of authority in this town. That's really like
What are you doing, Stanley?
wrinkled up like a raisin. They take Van Helsing off, but you get the sense that he probably won't be locked away for long because there's really not much of a structure, a system left to enact justice on him. Although there is a body. I mean, there is proof that he's murdered somebody. It's going to be hard to say that. Look at the way he steps out of that circle as soon as he can. And then he touches the cross to rip it off and throw it aside.
Seal the bedroom for the official investigation. And bring me my horse. I have much to do.
What a great twist ending this is. I have a hard time even talking through this because it's just such a great twist ending. And he's lit from the bottom in a very unnatural way. I mean, they'd have to have lights on their floor, and this is daylight. This is the morning. And then you just see him riding off, and you get the sense that maybe vampires can exist during the day. You don't see, you see the daylight kill Count Dracula, but you get the sense that maybe it's just that first morning ray, and that daylight, just like in the original Dracula novel, Dracula can come out during the day. It's not that light kills him; it's that he's at reduced power. He can't do much during the day in terms of his supernatural powers, and it's really that first light of day that kills him. And we get this long shot again of Jonathan going off to God knows where, maybe to Riga to reunite with Renfield and continue Dracula's work, maybe back to Dracula's castle. But he's basically done. That town is dried up and done. And zero credits. I mean, zero credits here. That's fucking wild.
No credits after this film. All the credit is to me, so I cannot put credits at the end of this film because this film is my masterwork, and if you do not agree, then your film credits will not be added either.
Okay. So that was Mr. Herzog reminding us why he didn't put any credits at the end of this film. Again, what a twist. Most of the Dracula stories end quite happily with Dracula vanquished, with the survivors restored to their kind of rightful positions and health. No one's arrested. Van Helsing is not arrested. Dracula is dead. With this, obviously, it's not a happy ending. Even though Dracula is vanquished by Lucy, Lucy is dead. It's the expense of her own life. And then Jonathan obviously finishes his transformation into the Nosferatu, the next Nosferatu. And that really seals home the analogy of Dracula as this pestilence and like a virus he can transfer. And Dracula can have this Nosferatu disease, but then he bites Harker, and now Harker develops this Nosferatu disease. And it also kind of strikes me that, you either die a hero like Lucy, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain like Harker. And it's very true in the ending for these characters in this film, and really just kind of sets the stage for this ongoing, it's not meant to set up a sequel, but it is meant to leave us with the idea that an ancient evil could still be out there, right? And that we're not truly safe, even in this modern day and age that we find ourselves in viewing this film, that we're surrounded by all of this technology. I'm on the internet right now. Surely this ancient evil doesn't exist. It's a figment of our imagination, but maybe it is out there. And I think it's really a really classy way to end the Dracula story, and a great way to end this film, making it obvious that Harker has finished his transformation and the Nosferatu lives on. It's really pretty cool. Herzog, you got any last thoughts? Anything that you want to say about
This has been Werner Herzog. I want to say that watching this film again with you, Jason, has been a great pleasure.
Thank
for me,
you.
a great honor for you and your vast audience to to kneel down before me and to receive my words and my wisdom and to honor me as the greatest filmmaker of a generation, of multiple generations, because it is I, of course, Werner Herzog, who is the greatest. And I hope that you have enjoyed our chat today, that I've blessed you with, and may you always find good health and happiness in the future. Amen.
Okay. Well, thank you, Werner Herzog. Everybody, give it up for Werner Herzog. Everybody, yay, Werner Herzog. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the wisdom, and thank you for this film. I think that this is, again, it's a film um, that truly does set up a mood and a vibe that is very horrific and terrifying, very appropriate for this time of year. I think it's easy to watch stuff that, like, oh, this is a horror film. Hocus Pocus. Yeah, it happens on Halloween. There's no mention of Halloween in this film, and yet I think it's a perfect film for evoking the visual imagery, the sound, and the general sense of foreboding and fear and terror that really people want to experience and enjoy at Halloween. So I will say thank you guys for sticking around and watching with us, with me and Werner, my homie Werner, as he wants me to call him. And thank you guys for hanging out. I hope that everybody has a great rest of your evening. Thank you guys. If you're patrons, then you can go watch this uncovered on Patreon, patreon.com/Team Almy. I want to encourage everybody to go join if you haven't already. And I want to wish you guys all a happy Halloween. Have a great time. We're going to be back with more movie mass and more shit shows next month, in the month of November. We're going to come with something fun. So check it out. And I will see you guys then. Peace.